Do you ever wonder how people have things to say when they make podcasts? I sure do, because there are very few of them that I've done that have successfully been able to synthesize a kind of charisma, a shared charisma, a chemistry, one might say, between both participants. And usually it's two. Three people, fuck that. I cannot do three-person podcasts. Just never. Four-person, too many. Two is my optimal number. And even then, it's extremely rare in the sea, the Titanic, the ephemeral Titanic that I have of podcasts that I've done. Um, Very few of them have been successful in terms of being able to harness the good vibes, good feel. And it's funny, I did a lot of these shows consistently. Many of them you can't find on my channel anymore because they were with people who want their privacy protected. But there were many of those shows that I did that I tried really, really hard to make something good out of. And just was never able to. I was never able to have consistent conversation, interesting conversation, and a lot of it resulted in meta-textual conversation about the podcast itself, which doesn't necessarily make for a good show if you're talking about the fact that the show is being recorded and critiquing it as it's being done. Kind of weird. But I tried doing a lot of different shows with a lot of different people, and most of them fell flat on their face. There's about three three episodes of podcasts that I've done that I like, and it was only because the topics that we had at hand arose naturally, and they just happened to be things that both of us had a lot of things to say and joke about. One thing always arose from the other, and that's because we just worked well together in that setting. It's as if we had forgotten that something was being recorded because we both had the same mindset about being an entertainer. Now, I think the Obstinate Abstractions cast I did with Kieran was a little bit different because the vibe of that podcast was that both of us were really chill, but we had a lot of things to say about the topics at hand, and we were just kind of floundering around, but in a nice way. That's a very, very rare feeling that isn't really brought about in most shows, but it was one that we were able to get out at 7 a.m. When both of us were basically dead tired, but still wanted to joke around. I don't think I'm going to be able to produce a show like that one again. Maybe I will, but I doubt it. Um, and so that one was a real outlier. But the two episodes of the informal anime cast I did with Korax Catalyst, I think, represented something very specific, very special. Because both of us are YouTubers. We both have similar mindsets about making YouTube, about life in general, about politics. We think about a lot of the same things, even about media to a degree. And so, while we're very different on many things, the conditions at hand allowed us to produce something that both of us could have fun with and were comfortable with, and we got so in the zone that at a certain point we were just being entertainers as if there were no camera watching. That was like a natural state of being for those two shows, and they came out really well because of it. Um, but that isn't like an energy that I can harness with most people because I find that my chemistry with most people is incredibly skewed or one sided, where I spend a lot of time ranting about a subject and then the other person doesn't have very many responses or they move on to some other thing. Where it's as if I'm recording a vlog like one of these, but to someone's face. That's how it feels. I go on and on and on, and then the people listen to me the whole time, but they don't really have anything to say. And by the end, I wonder, why didn't I just make that a video? If I'm not going to gain any ideas, if I'm not going to have a more a more what's the word when like mutual have a more mutual transaction of both participants are receiving something um, stimulating. Both of us have a good chemistry with one another. If we're not receiving that, then what's the point? And I kind of tie this back to my general, what do you want to call it, social ineptitude or social apathy, is that every day when I go to school, I never talk to anybody. I just stay in my own little corner and I don't ever feel lonely. It's been so long since I felt lonely. Like I can't the I have to go really really far back to remember a time when I felt like that. But it's been so long that it's difficult for me to even remember what the loneliness feels like. Um, and so when I'm around people and I have the chance to be around them in real life or online, I usually choose to not be. Even like most of what I say in text chat, which I don't even do very many voice calls, it's people have to compel me to do them. They have to ask me. I don't usually ask other people. Most of what I do in text chat is just rant about myself or rant about ideas that I have, concepts that I have. I don't have a lot of like discussions. It's more like people are just listening to me go on and on and on about bullshit. Um, I've always done this, and it's made doing podcasts absurdly difficult because I don't know how to find a synergy with other people where both of us have like a dynamic and both of us have like chemistry. I just kind of say things in a void, and I don't find myself being particularly motivated to make close relationships. Most of the time, I don't. It's almost like close relationships kind of fall into my lap. Like they just kind of happen, but I'm not actively pursuing them. Um, it's weird. It's really weird. Now, most of the close relationships that I've retained have just been retained because people were interested in retaining them. It wasn't like there was an active effort on my part to preserve it. It was more so that uh, people kind of just fell in my lap. Um, and so it's weird. It's really weird. Like most of the best friends that I've had, quote unquote, usually ended up uh, pettering off at some point. Like either I had an opinion that made them mad and then they went off, or people just got bored and they stopped talking to me, or I just got bored and I stopped replying back. Um, it's only the people who have made a really active effort to continue being my friend that have stayed around all these years. Um, and so it's weird to think about, isn't it? It's weird to think about how, podcast making is so internally tied to the dynamic. Most of my favorite podcasts, like my favorite podcast is Chapo Trap House. I love listening to that show. It's really, really funny. Um, Main reason I like it so much isn't just because the hosts are knowledgeable, and they always have a unique or interesting spin on things. They're always able to be funny. It's because those stars would not be able to align without all of them being together. Because they have their individual strengths, but I wouldn't want to listen to any of them individually, except maybe Matt Christman. I like Matt a lot, but I wouldn't want to listen to any of them individually by and large. It's them coming together, that charisma that ultimately creates a product. Like, what's the point of doing a podcast if not for the fact that there are two hosts? Podcasts are a group effort. It is not a one-man show like what I do here. If someone is just ranting on and there's little to no responses, or the responses themselves don't particularly add anything to the discussion, that is not a podcast. That is a vlog with someone else present in it. Truly good, vibrant, and interesting podcasts are what they are because both hosts, or the multitude of hosts, are able to add something to one another. One idea gets completed by the other person as if all individuals partaking in it work as a synergy with one another, that you could not have one without the other. Um, but I don't have that experience because my personality and my interests are so insular, so tied to myself, so tied to this strange metatextual world that I've crafted where everything is connected to 100 things ago, and I have to talk about how video games, why I like them is tied to this thing when I was 4 years old and I am very dumb. And it's like everything I say is like building off of the 100 other videos that I've made. I'm always making references to other things I've said. Like, this is just a narrative building in on itself over and over and over and over again. And I, I'm just so invested in what I have to say and in my own ideas or like things that I've learned from other sources that I don't really know how to have proper interactions with other people. And I'm not particularly interested in having a traditionally good persona of learning how to appeal to the masses on a social level because I just don't care. I sit at lunch by myself every day. I like it. I'm more entertained by my imagination than I would be by other people. Not because I'm angry at those people or I have a distaste for them. It's just because I'm relatively indifferent to their existence and I find what I have to think about more interesting. It's not that I'm anxious around them. I don't really get anxious about anything. And so it's like I have to work. I have to work really, really hard to feel an emotion when I'm with other people. I have to try. It's like I have to harness that within myself. I have to try really, really hard to feel. And it's funny. I had a friend who once told me, Star, you're one of the only people, or I think he said, you're like the only person in this chat who's done like actually terrible things. Why is it that you go on and on so much about needing to love humanity and have an optimistic attitude? And I thought that was an interesting point because I do try really, really hard to harness the emotional pathos that would typically be attributed to having such a Buddhist positive outlook of we need to work together and forge the collective will of people and be a positive force in the world, really bloomerish kind of stuff. But that's not like my baseline energy. My baseline energy is to spend the vast, vast amount of time by myself and to think, pursue my interests, which are few in number. It's kind of like me just constantly pursuing the same narrow set of things, and to continue doing that forever. There isn't much feeling involved. It's kind of like emotions need not apply. Because if you go back through my videos, the times in which I was the most emotional were always the times where I was like knocked up on medications and stuff. Now, my baseline energy is not particularly emotional. I'm just kind of a guy who exists. And if you go back, why am I saying if you go back? There was another point I was gonna make. My memory is so poor that I just make a point and then I go to the next one and then, like as I'm forming it, I start to forget. But podcasts are for people who have people skills and like work well with other people. I'm in this very weird position where my lack of people skills isn't necessarily because I'm anxious, because I'm not. It's just out of sheer disinterest. Where I know I could theoretically learn, but most of my interactions with people come down to me awkwardly smiling and giggling and then saying some kind of random thing that I think will land well or might not land well, and then trying to end the conversation as soon as possible just because I want to go back to being by myself. Um, no, back when I was on lots of medications, I used to regularly ask people to do calls, and I felt really lonely when I was in some of those calls because it wasn't that I wanted to be with other people, it was that I wanted to cancel out the negative emotions that I was constantly feeling. As you experience so many bad things, eventually they stop feeling nearly as bad, and you learn how to cope with them. But at the time, it was like all of the bad things that I experienced were so amplified because of the terrible effects of these medicines that I would just want to be with people all the time. I would try to record a podcast And I would try to just surround myself with people the whole day so I could find some kind of way of ignoring what I was feeling internally. And it didn't really work. Those internal feelings were still there. They were just slightly canceled out. I wasn't paying as much attention to them, but they were still there. And so I ended up feeling lonely even though I wasn't alone. And that's one of the things about loneliness, is that it's a mindset. I might make a separate video about this, but I almost never feel lonely. I haven't felt lonely in I think like a year and a half, and even back then, when I thought that was extreme back then, it was rare. It was a rare occurrence, and I thought that was extreme. I've almost never felt lonely throughout most of my life, and it's because I fill my time with things that I enjoy or am stimulated by, and I don't have this inclination to talk to other people. It's just not a thing. I know there are people in the Hiding in My Room Discord. They were theorizing about whether or not I was asexual, and someone mentioned this on one of my live streams. And I think it's a really interesting point, because I don't have any kind of drive to have sex or be interested in sex, and yet I'm attracted to both sexes, bisexuality or whatever, but I don't want to act on it because I don't particularly care. Like whipping my equipment out and going for a fap, it feels like a waste of time. It's not particularly pleasurable. It doesn't really mean anything to me. It's just something that my body is able to do. And so I almost never do it. Like I do it like a few times in a year. It's almost never. And so is there just something different about my brain? Do I just interpret and see reality differently than everybody else? I don't know. Um, I've been able to masquerade as a normal person through making my speech go up and down as an entertainer in video form, and observing the general trends of YouTubers to be able to present myself as an entertainer. But as a person, I'm not quite that special. I just kind of exist. I don't feel much one way or the other. Nothing too positive nor negative, just existence itself. Um, and this kind of desire that people have to spend time with others, to have chemistry with others, I find myself both not always being able to do, and also not always having the desire to do. It's bizarre.